All right, welcome on into the Auburn Daily Show, everybody. Episode 14 of the Auburn Daily Show. Everybody's happy and well. Beautiful day here in Auburn, Alabama. Got a jam-packed show for you guys today. On yesterday's show, I wish we could talk about it more because I absolutely love talking about this prediction type of stuff. ESPN's FPI came out just a couple of days ago. We got to discuss where Auburn's ranked on yesterday's show, and it was really, really entertaining to be able to go through just the chaos that is ESPN FPI. And we wrote about it earlier. You can go check it out over on auburndaily.com to see all the odds that ESPN has for the Auburn Tigers this season. Projects them to go 7-5, but they're very highly ranked, quite frankly, for a team that's projected to go 7-5. If you guys aren't already, go ahead and follow us on the socials at SI_Auburn on Twitter. You can also follow us on Facebook at Auburn Daily. For today's show, just kind of wanted to run through some statistics here. And then also we've got a conversation between Zach Blackerby of the Locked on Auburn podcast and John Garcia, who is a recruiting specialist over at Sports Illustrated. Going to be listening to that conversation in a little while. But today, wanted to start off with some statistics because I absolutely love digging into numbers during the offseason and doing some projections and different things like that. So on today's episode, we are going to go through some of Auburn's offensive statistics from 2021 and just essentially predict whether they're over or they're under that total. Before we get into that, though, and we'll start with total yardage, but before we get into that, there was a poll I ran over on the Locked on Auburn Instagram, and the poll just a couple of days ago was asking, who do you think, or who do you want to start at quarterback? Excuse me. That was the poll. What's going on, Zach? But we ran the poll just essentially asking not who do you think, but who do you want to start at quarterback? And here are the results. TJ Finley finished with 4% of the votes. Zach Calzada finished with 31% of the votes. Holden Gariner finished with 10% of the votes. And then Robbie Ashford finished with 55% of the votes. 137 people said that they wanted Robbie Ashford to be the starting quarterback for the Auburn Tigers this season. And we're not going to name names here, but there were two former players that just recently were with the program, very recently, in fact, that voted for Robbie Ashford. We're not going to name names. I just thought that was interesting. What's up, Trey, in the chat? What's going on, man? Talking about Auburn's offensive statistics for 2022, whether or not they're going to improve or they're going to regress in a bunch of different areas. But I wanted to start off by noting you guys believe that Robbie Ashford, well, not you, Trey, specifically. I'm just talking about, I ran a poll and 137 people said that they wanted Robbie Ashford to be the starting quarterback this season. So, therefore, I'm going to break down these numbers as if it is potentially either Holden Gariner, or Robbie Ashford or Zach Calzada, not TJ Finley or Holden Gariner, So we're going to break down these passing numbers and such with the assumption that either Calzada or Ashford will be QB1, because those were the results from the poll that I asked you guys about. Okay, so I want to start here with total yardage. Auburn wasn't fantastic in total yardage. In fact, they were quite mid, as the cool kids say, in a lot of different areas this past season. 401.3 total yards is what the Tigers averaged last season. That was 67th nationally. So essentially right at average in the entire country. So the question here is, do we believe that Auburn will average above that or below that in 2022? And man, I continue to go back and reference this schedule, because I think that the schedule, despite it being first in the country in terms of strength of schedule, I think that Auburn's got an opportunity to win some of these games and to put some yardage up. So obviously last season in Auburn's 2 games that they played early on, the non-conference games that were basically meaningless against Akron and Alabama State, put up a ton of points, ton of yards. So you look at Mercer and San Jose State here at the beginning of the season. I think Auburn's going to be able to rack up some yardage there against Penn State. Penn State depleted on the defensive line. I'm curious to see what Auburn's rushing attack looks like in that game as opposed to last season. Did have some success with Bigsby. Not a ton, but did have some success with Bigsby and Jarquez Hunter, as a matter of fact. Then you got Missouri at home. Missouri was one of the worst defenses in the country last season when it came to stopping the run. And you've got LSU, who was not phenomenal at stopping the run last season either. So you look at those first 5 games of the season, you've got an opportunity to put some yardage up total. Because here's my thing. If you are leaning on Tank Bigsby early in the season, you can also afford to maybe take some shots with Calzada or Ashford whenever teams least expect it. Now, this is not Gus Malzahn's offense. This is not run, hit you with a play action and throw the ball as far as you can to Sammy Coates. This, I think, is a little bit more methodical, this offense under Brian Harsin. And I think he'll be able to execute for the first 5 games. Now, obviously, you go on the road to Georgia right after that. I'm not sure how many points Auburn's scoring in Athens, considering they've barely scored any points against the Bulldogs in the past decade. So you play at Georgia. I mean, you're going to get an opportunity to put some yardage up against Ole Miss, Arkansas, Mississippi State. Texas A&M is going to be a stout defense, but it's at home. Then you get Western Kentucky, you play at Alabama. I truly believe that there's an opportunity for Auburn to finish top 35 in the nation in total yardage, especially if Tank Bigsby is better than he was last season, which we'll get to that here in just a second. But I would say Auburn is over in terms of total yards per game. I'd say they hit the over, and I say that they have more than 400 average, or at least they're going to average over 400 per game. Rushing yards per game is what I want to get to next, and this is kind of what I was talking about with Tank Bigsby. And you look at the way that the schedule sets up. I mean, early on, you're playing either some average to bad rush defenses. I would say that 3 of them are bad rush defenses. One of them is average, and to be quite honest with you, I'd have to pull up LSU's rushing statistics. Actually, I'm going to pull it up right here. LSU was 46th nationally in rushing yards allowed per game at 140, and that game's at home. So yeah, I would say that 4 of these games, Tank Bigsby should have an opportunity to eclipse 100 yards easily, and I think Jarquez Hunter is going to be able to serve his purpose as well. And then LSU, I think, is the one question mark there. But yes, you look at Auburn's rushing stats from last season, 161.2 rushing yards per game. That was 67th nationally. Another mid statistic for the Tigers. If the offensive line can figure out how to run block just a little bit better, I think Auburn's got a really solid backfield. We got to see it in glimpses early on last season. I think we get to see it again this year. So I'm going to say over for rushing yards, and I think that's going to be the main reason Auburn hits the over on total yardage per game as well. Underrated comments can only see the offense improving going into year 2. Take every game with a grain of salt, especially the first 5 being at home. War Eagle to you, underrated, and I agree. You can go and you can look through. I mean, let's look at Missouri. Missouri was 124th in rush defense last season. Let's look at San Jose State. San Jose State was they were 36th nationally in rushing yards allowed per game. But if you look at the returning production, they've not got a lot returning on the defensive side of the ball. So, and also it's a group of 5 school, much less the Mountain West. And I watch Auburn come in and beat, and watch San Jose State and somehow come in and beat Auburn next season. But yeah, I think Auburn hits the over on rushing yards and total yardage per game. What about passing yardage per game? This is actually an area that surprised me last season. It's statistically Auburn's best passing offense in terms of total yardage per game, or total passing yardage per game in quite some time. I may be mistaken. So if anybody out there listening knows the answer and I don't, I apologize. But I believe it's Auburn's best season in terms of average passing yards per game since 2004. I may be wrong on that. I may be completely off on that. And if so, I apologize. But I believe that is true. I believe the 2014 averaged like 245 passing yards per game, if I'm not mistaken. And actually, considering we're sitting in front of collegefootballstats.com, I mean, no, they've only got it through 2009. So whatever. We'll talk about that at another day. But passing yards per game. So Auburn averaged 240.1, which was 59th nationally. More surprised about that, quite frankly, than anything else on this list. Of course, when you really start to think about last season, you begin to realize, like, well, late Auburn was throwing the ball more than they were running it. Teams were kind of honing in on Tank Bigsby. The offensive line wasn't really run blocking well. And the Tigers had to throw it more, and sometimes they just threw it because they could. Whether that was the right decision or the wrong decision, we can talk about that another day. But Auburn's passing game, I think, exceeded expectations, at least for me, last season. So you look at what the passing offense is going to do this season. Let's assume it's Zach Calzada or Robbie Ashford. If it's Zach Calzada, I think that you're going to see Auburn try and utilize the downfield passing attack just a little bit more. Statistically, he's not a great thrower, or he's not great accuracy-wise on short to intermediate throws. He's pretty decent at some long downfield throws. He's got a really strong arm, Calzada does. So if Auburn goes and rocks with him, I think they are going to try and use Javarius Johnson's speed a little bit, Malcolm Johnson Jr., Landon King on some one-on-one situations down the field. Maybe attack the middle of the field with Shedrick Jackson. I know Zach Calzada throws with a little bit of velocity. Hope that Jackson would be able to hold on to his passes consistently. But if Zach Calzada operates the offense, I don't know if Auburn eclipses 240 passing yards per game this season, but I think there's certainly opportunity, especially if he can hone in on his intermediate throws, specifically to the right side of the field. Last season, he was really, really bad when it came to throwing to the right side of the field, just about period. So I think that if Calzada starts, I'm going to say no, Auburn does not eclipse 240 passing yards a game. And quite frankly, if Ashford starts, I don't know if they eclipse it either. I really, really do like what we saw out of Robbie Ashford during the spring game. And I think that he's got an opportunity to be an explosive player. I really like his athleticism. I really do like his arm strength, much like Calzada's. He's going to need to refine his accuracy and his passing mechanics, I think, just a little bit. And I don't know if Auburn would be taking a ton of chances with Ashford early. Who knows? I may be wrong, but that's just my assumption. But yeah, I don't think either quarterback would surpass 240 passing yards a game. I don't think so. I don't think Auburn will just magically out of the blue with this group of quarterbacks have their best passing offense in a really long time. And if it's TJ Finley, RIP to the entire offense. No, that's a joke. I think actually Auburn would be more inclined to throw with Finley than either of the two guys. And then if it's Holden Garner, I've got absolutely no idea what the offense is going to do there. So I think in most scenarios, Auburn hits the under actually on passing yards per game. So over on total yardage, over on rushing yards, but under on passing yards. And I'm not saying significantly, I'm just saying under. And then the final one here that I wanted to discuss, sacks allowed per game. And actually, we may go through a few more stats here. Sacks allowed per game. Auburn was actually pretty good in this category. Even though they were giving up some sacks late in the year, Auburn was 36th nationally in sacks allowed per game. Averaged 1.7 sacks given up. Now, you can talk about like pressure rate and different things like that and whether or not quarterbacks had time to throw, which we've talked about before on this show. But I think that the Tigers, if they were good at pass blocking last season and they brought back just about everybody and their mother, I think that they should stay right about where they were last season as long as they're healthy. So a healthy Auburn offensive line, I don't know if they necessarily improve. I would say push in this scenario. I think they're going to be somewhere around 40th and 35th nationally in sacks allowed per game. I think they're going to do the same thing again. Run blocking is another question, but I think sacks allowed per game, just based on the fact that Auburn brings back so many different guys, I think they're going to stay relatively the same. The reason I don't think that they would get better by a significant margin is because most of these guys are incredibly experienced. I just don't know how much development they have left in them. And I don't know how much they would be able to learn after being at Auburn for a couple of them, 4 or 5 seasons now. So that's my take on the offensive statistics. And then will Auburn be perpetually mid statistically forever? I mean, we noted 67th, 59th, 68th, 67th. Auburn is in a rough spot right now in terms of offensive efficiency and then explosiveness. And I think it's just going to take a while for the Tigers to really ramp up there. Well, one more thing, actually, points per game. Of course, everybody loves to talk about points per game. 28.3 points per game. What the Tigers were averaging last season, 68th nationally. Right there, smack dab in the middle. Average is literally the average nationally. Here's an interesting note, though. Auburn averaged 17.8 points during their 5-game losing streak. They averaged 34.9 points per game before that. And I believe they only scored 1 second-half touchdown during that 5-game losing streak. If Auburn does not collapse late in the year and their quarterback stays healthy, I think the offense doesn't look as terrible as it did at times last year, because he scored 3 against Texas A&M, scored 17 against South Carolina, 22 against Alabama, and then 13 against Houston in the bowl game. And you look at the back half of this year's schedule, like I said, if you can go on the road to Georgia, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and then play well against Texas A&M offensively, I'm not saying great, I'm just saying well, Auburn's got an opportunity to easily clear 28 points per game this season. Now, are they going to easily clear it? I don't know. But I think the opportunity is certainly there. I mean, the bar is set relatively low for the program. Any other offensive statistics I wanted to go over here before we kick it to Zach Blackerby's interview with John Garcia? I don't think so. Just overall, I think a final note here is I do think the offense takes a step forward. Like Underrated said, I think it's going to improve. And I think it's going to improve in a lot of different areas. And it has the opportunity. What the ceiling is, I think, for this squad, if we're talking just raw statistics, we're saying points per game wise, I'd say 37, 38 points a game, I think, is what this team's ceiling is, to be honest with you. And I don't know where Auburn would sit. If you had to just tell me, like, guess what their points per game is going to be next season, I'd have to go through and project every single game and just kind of average things out and give you my thoughts there. But yeah, I think that Auburn takes a step forward offensively. And that's where I stand on it. All right, let's go ahead and kick it to Zach Blackerby's conversation with John Garcia. Talked about some Auburn recruits. Also talked about Terrence Love, what he can bring to the team. 4-star safety that just committed to the Tigers. Really excited about him as a prospect, actually, after hearing what Garcia had to say. But anyway, here is Zach Blackerby and John Garcia.
Both fronts, Zach, of course. You know, right. Always want to talk some ball with guys like yourself. No doubt.
No, that means a ton. All right, so Auburn got some cool news on Sunday. Got a big time safety, or what I assume is a big time safety. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Terrence Love, the 4-star safety out of Georgia. What do you like about this guy?
Well, I see where you're going there with. Well, I think he's a safety. Look, 6'3", near 200 pounds already as a junior going into a senior year of high school there at Langston Hughes in Georgia, as you mentioned. This could be a very interesting position projection down the line. But as far as what we know now of Love, he is a safety. He is a guy who can play all 3 phases of the defense. He's very comfortable coming downhill, playing the alley, playing inside the box. But you watch his tape and you see a lot of ability in the passing game as well. This isn't just a big, oversized, linebacker at the high school level. This kid gets interceptions. He is smooth down the field. You watch his hips. He can flip them with a running back, a tight end, maybe a slot receiver, and he's just so darn big. 6'3" at the high school level, really stands out on the defensive side of the ball. You don't see that in the back 7 very often. And what I love about him, Zach, is that he plays a lot of offense. They line him up at wide receiver. They're like, hey, 6'3", let's do this jump ball right quick.
Cover that, high school defender. Yeah.
Exactly. So, you get more ball skills and you see, the overall football player-ness of a guy like Terrence Love. And that's what you love about a kid like that, because he's going into college where in this day and age, Zach, these positions are less defined than they've ever been. You know,
Right.
safeties are linebackers, linebackers are nickels, nickels are corners, corners are safeties. It all kind of blends together relative to the defensive package. So I love getting guys like this if I'm an Auburn fan, because he's going to play probably a different position on all three downs if the defense allows him to. And you need guys like that to win in a league like the SEC. That goes without saying much else. He's physical against the run, comfortable against the pass, and has a frame that you can work with. You either bulk him up and he's maybe more of a conventional linebacker, but he still has that safety pedigree, so he can stay on the field on third down as a cover guy, which is really valuable in any league.
Yeah, no, coverage ability at a linebacker spot. Yeah, give that to me. Auburn has missed that over the last half decade or so. But so, John, I've read a bunch of different reports on this kid after he committed, and some folks believe that he truly is a linebacker. When you talk to folks that covered his recruitment, I mean, it sounds like Terrence wants to play safety, and it sounds like Auburn sees him as a safety. I mean, will they try that first? I mean, you mentioned you can go either way with his frame. You got to think they're going to try to keep him lean and mean, right?
You start at safety and you go from there. It's where he's most familiar. He's played at a high level. Langston Hughes played great competition in the state of Georgia. And again, just because you're labeled at one position doesn't mean you can't flirt and blend with other positions down the line. It's much easier also to add weight, and then saying, hey, you got to stay at 200 pounds. Let him add some weight, but cap it at some point. And then if you go all in on linebacker down the line, maybe his second year, now you can add the weight relatively easy with an SEC strength and conditioning program and nutrition program like Auburn has in place. But yeah, he wants to play safety. He models his game after Cam Chancellor, which was really the original hybrid, right? Like the original, physical enforcer hybrid. You can't do a lot of those things in football anymore because of the rules. But, 6'3", 200 pounds sitting back there will make a receiver think twice before the snap is even made. So I do think that there is a value to keeping him in the back end. It's all going to be up to him ultimately. How athletic does he stay as he adds some weight? Because it's just a matter of time before you add some bulk to a frame like that. So it will be interesting to see, and I would imagine there would eventually be a position change, but I think you start out where the kid is most familiar at safety.
John, we talk about momentum all the time in virtually every aspect of any sport, which is great. I love that. Recruiting, though, you hear it. It seems like these commitments typically come in batches, and a lot of Auburn fans are upset that Auburn only has two guys committed right now. We can jump into that topic in a second, but does a decision like this kind of cause any sort of ripple effect where Auburn fans can kind of be hopeful about some other guys' decisions over the next few weeks?
Well, Langston Hughes in general has a lot of top prospects, not only in the 23 class, but even beyond in 24 and even 25. So that is always good to have an Auburn Tiger in a Georgia powerhouse. And I think that's why you saw the staff so excited over the weekend after he committed. Right. Somebody was hashtagging the Peach State pipeline and all that. And look, Zach, to be great at Auburn, you have to win in the state of Georgia. You have to win in the state of Florida. And then obviously you have to keep some Alabamians within state lines. Those are the three states for the Auburn Tigers. It's always been like that for the great Auburn teams, and this administration knows that at AU. So getting into Georgia is a great second place to go on the commitment list. And look, there's a lot of Peach State guys that the Tigers are in on. I don't know if he has a generic ripple effect, like, hey, I committed, so now you're going to commit. It's not that simple. Yeah. But it does provide some validity to those guys, not only at Langston Hughes, but in the state of Georgia because of that familiarity with Auburn. Again, you're going to get Georgia kids on campus seemingly every weekend. So having one on board as a commitment makes a lot of sense. And look, he's a popular guy, had 30 scholarship offers, been getting offers for 18 plus months. So people know who Terrence Love is. And I think that adds to the value for sure.
Auburn had a chance to get a third commitment added to that class earlier this week. Chris Vizina, the very, you kind of talked me into being excited about him. A stud, absolute stud when you look at what he was doing at Briarwood Christian up in Birmingham. But had Auburn in his final six, ultimately chose the Clemson Tigers. He chose the wrong Tigers, John. But where does Auburn go following that news in your mind?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of quarterbacks that are still waiting to find their spots. And I think in the region, there's a very good crop that are still certainly available. I wonder if Auburn kicks the tires on Marcel Reed up in Tennessee. I know Eli Holstein, when he decommitted from Texas A&M, had a bevy of schools try to get involved. Auburn has offered Dante Moore, who's the top quarterback in the Midwest, and it looks like he's going to take his time now making a decision. So that could be, if Auburn's going to make a move and climb slowly somewhere, Dante Moore could be a great target for that, and he's one of the best in the country. If he takes all 5 officials, maybe you get him back down to the Plains after he visited on a bus tour just a couple weeks ago. So there's certainly some interest there and some familiarity with Brian Harsin and company. So I do think that's a potential avenue for the Tigers as well. But I do think that there's other groups that are going to have movement, that are going to trickle down to where Auburn can successfully land a quarterback in this class. But look, Auburn and Clemson were kind of in that same boat where they were like, Vizina's the guy, and then after that, we'll see. So I think we're still in the we'll see part for Auburn, but there's plenty of kids that will be interested. And you just wonder who they're going to get on campus. And there's a kid in Georgia, Dylan Lonergan, who's a two-sport guy, great baseball player, which Auburn is certainly familiar with, football, baseball combo guys.
Sure.
He's a guy that I could see the Tigers beginning to push a little bit more for. And the kid wants to play baseball at the next level. And that's something that I'm not sure every other school on his list, mainly Alabama and Georgia, I'm not sure if they'll fly with something like that. But I think Florida, a school like Auburn, can certainly sell that and try to make up some ground here in the meantime. So it's a great year for quarterbacks. This is my favorite year at the top since 2018, which was the Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields year. So it is very deep. It will get better for Auburn, but certainly when you lose an in-state kid, it does hurt. And there's no mistake that the Tigers wanted Vizina on their roster.
John Garcia joining us on today's Locked on Auburn. So I guess this is more of like a recruiting philosophy question, but how important is it for Auburn to land a top quarterback in this class? I mean, they've got a bunch of guys that are going to be here for a few seasons. It looks like they can't use their free transfer anymore. Then obviously Holden Geriner, I think the world of him. I think he's going to be a really good player for the Tigers. I hope it's for the Tigers. How important is it to get a quarterback this year, the year after you got a guy like Holden?
You have to bring in a quarterback every year. Now you can't get away with skipping a year or two because of the fluidity, I should say, of the quarterback position. These quarterback rooms change, it seems like every few months now, right? With the portal. I mean, JT Daniels just jumped on with West Virginia today. I mean, who saw that coming 6 months ago, right? So,
yeah.
There's so much fluidity in the quarterback room that you have to stack guy after guy because there will be attrition. And Auburn has obviously dealt with that as much as anyone over the last 12 months or so. So you have to stack Geriner with another capable quarterback. But maybe you say, hey, I will do a different type of skill set. Geriner, pocket guy, great feet, efficient, smart. Maybe you go with more of a run-first guy who's a more developmental passer. Maybe something like that will fit the mold a little bit in terms of countering and building a quarterback room. But either way, you have to get a name. You have to get a guy who can come in and be capable in some way, shape, or form because you just never know how quarterback rooms are going to shake out from really 1 month to the next these days. And we're going to see it a lot here in the next few weeks. These spring games, half of them are over. The other half are coming up the next week or two. And the portal's going to have another influx. So quarterbacks will not be spared from that one.
Right. John, before I let you go today, let's talk a little bit offensive line, specifically Clay Whedon. He's from Tampa, isn't that right? He's a Tampa kid or from Florida?
Is, yep.
Yeah.
Carrollwood Day. Yep.
Yeah. What do we think about a kid like him?
I think Auburn fans need to keep a close eye on Clay. You talk about a fit. He loves the style of Auburn. He's taken multiple trips on his own dime. He's already set the official visit to come back in June. So I think the Tigers are in really good shape. I think he's a kid who's more likely to lead the state of Florida than stay in it, although the Hurricanes just got him on campus as well. And we know, you have an offensive line-minded head coach that certainly holds weight with Mario Cristobal. But if and when he leaves the state, I think Auburn, Michigan State are probably the two schools to keep the closest eye on. And those are the two officials that he has set up at this point for the month of June. And I think the timing there is going to be critical. So, you're going to get him on campus one more time. And we're starting to get the feel. I was talking to somebody in Tampa this morning. starting to get the feel that he wants to be done before Carrollwood Day opens the season in August. So if you get a June official and maybe a July decision, you're in good shape if you're the Auburn Tigers. He's from Tampa, but he's got more country style to him. He's got the beard going. Yeah. So I think there's a fit there off the field as well with Clay. I mean, he keeps coming back to campus, so he really likes what's being sold to him there on the Plains. And you don't have to be from the state or even from the region to know what playing SEC football means, especially up front. And when you're 6'6", with 298, 300 pounds, that means a lot. And obviously Auburn's side, you need offensive linemen. I mean, this has been for 2-3 years now. We're like, hey, Auburn needs to ramp it up on the O-line. So dipping into Florida, again, another pipeline state, would be really critical for a guy like Clay.
I mean, you mentioned his measurables there, 6'6", just south of 300 pounds, depending on where you look. Is that an offensive guard? Could he scoot out and play tackle? What are you thinking there?
I think guard is certainly the floor for Clay. I mean, he's probably not going to get smaller over the next year and a half. So, he'll be 300 plus. But let me tell you, this kid is a grunt in the weight room. He carries that weight really well. He's got the height to carry it well. So I do think he can maybe play on the right side of the offensive line at tackle. But guard is certainly the floor for him. But he's moved around in high school, 4-year starter at the varsity level. So he's got some tackle upside down the road. But I think the floor is certainly at guard for Clay. He's a baller. I mean, he wants to be he wants to play with that style that he presents with his aesthetic. He wants to maul and be there in the muck, in the trenches. And that's another reason why he likes Auburn. That scheme wants to be a little bit more balanced. It wants to be a little bit more run first. Yeah. So there's a connection there.
Right. Sure. And then, to the Auburn fans watching or listening to this right now, John, that are concerned that Auburn only has 2 members of its 2023 class committed so far, what would you say to them? It's too early, right?
Yeah. I'm not going to spell out the whole Aaron Rodgers press conference from a few years ago, but let's just relax. Just hang tight. It's the spring, and it's the spring where the portal is king. It's really dictating the pace for just about everybody. Look across the state. They've got a couple commits over there as well in total. So everything's at a bit of a slower pace. Quarterback is certainly one of the big focuses. The trenches as well. Those will start to develop into the summer months. Most of these kids want to be done before their senior season, but now you could take official visits starting in April, take more in June. I think a lot of kids are going to take advantage of that before making these verbal commitments. So I wouldn't worry about the volume just yet, especially with some time left in spring ball where there's going to be more attrition. So your needs can also shift. And I think a lot of schools are leaving room to allow that fluidity to happen.
John, you're incredible as always, my friend. How can people find you and read all of your content?
Well, when I'm not hanging out with you here, I'll be at si.com/college at SI All-American via all social media handles. And my handle is just my name, John Garcia _JR.
There you have it. There's your conversation between Zach Blackerby and John Garcia. Interesting conversation, talking all things Auburn Cruton. It's not as bad as some people want to make it out to be. It's certainly not the case. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of the Auburn Daily Show. If you aren't following us on social media, go ahead and do it at SI_Auburn on Twitter, also on Facebook at Auburn Daily. We live stream here every single weekday at 4 p.m. on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitch. If you want to go subscribe or follow us on all of those platforms, it would be awesome as well. On tomorrow's episode, going to have our weekly roundtable with Trey Lee, Zach Blackerby, Lindsey Crosby, Andrew. Andrew, your name is too long. Your name is too long. But yeah, we will catch you all tomorrow. It's going to be really fun. And I will see you all then. Have a good day, everybody. And God bless.